With over hundreds of characters introduced in the original G1 run of the Transformers, I think it's safe to say that when it comes to head or helmet designs, we've come a long way from those basic Prowl and Soundwave looks that were sort of derived from the original Autobot and Decepticon logos. Through the years, we've come across a variety of different noggins for our robots in disguise, ranging from the most basic and featureless to some of the most intricate and detailed. But I'm sure many would agree that one of the most interesting and visually striking ones out there would be the Decepticon Cyclonus' bunny ears. The third wave of Transformers toys that came out in 1986 were quite an interesting bunch for two main reasons. The first was that by this time, Hasbro had already imported most of the Diaclone robots they could get their hands on from Japan. And second, Transformers was arguably at its financial peak, and they had enough moolah to invest on all new original designs. And speaking of original designs, most of these came from the very talented Filipino artist and Transformers design supervisor, Floro Derry. Now, unlike previous years wherein Derry's work was based on already existing toys, this time around, he had free reign, and it would be now the toy makers at Hasbro and Takara who would have the unenviable job of translating Derry's more organically detailed work into plastic form. And so, despite their maximum effort, given the technology of the time, a lot of those 86 bots were definite departures from what we were used to, and while some were okay, I would say that visually the worst of the bunch would be the Decepticon saboteur, Cyclonus, who had the biggest honkin' head I had ever seen on a Transformer. And if that wasn't bad enough, it was topped off with two extensions best described as horns, and at worst made him look like an evil robot rabbit. But to be fair though, other than his oversized head, there was still a lot to like with this toy, as there is to like about this video. The rest of Cyclonus' proportions in robot mode were fairly balanced. He had a really nice deep purple deco and a cool looking futuristic forward swept wing jet mode to boot. Although, I think the main reason why the silliness of Cyclonus' toy is generally given a pass by many fans is because in pretty much every iteration of the Transformers where he is featured, I think Cyclonus is one of the most awesomely portrayed and fearsome looking Decepticons ever. So let's start at the very beginning, shall we? Where Cyclonus was first introduced in the 1986 Transformers animated movie as one of the three main new bad guys of the story. The trio of Cyclonus, along with the Hunter, Tracker, Scourge, and the City Commander Galvatron, are the latest creations of the new alpha villain of the movie, the bringer of chaos, the planet-eating planet Unicron. So for the benefit of those who have been living under a rock since 1985, as the story goes, after an epic battle in Autobot City on Earth, during the first part of the movie, a number of familiar OG Decepticons that we grew up watching, including the Decepticon leader Megatron, are grievously injured and are ultimately dumped out into space, where they drift aimlessly along until they come across Unicron, who basically upgrades them into new, more powerful forms to do his bidding and bring him the only thing he fears in the galaxy, the Autobot Matrix of Leadership. And so Megatron is upgraded into Galvatron, Thundercracker into Scourge, and Skywarp is turned into Cyclonus. Okay, before all the pitchforks, torches, or more specifically, bombshells go off, yes, I am aware that there is an epic and ongoing debate on exactly which Decepticon was turned into Cyclonus. On one side, you have the elite seeker, Skywarp, and on the other, the devious and calculating Insecticon, Bombshell. So let's get right into this, shall we? The number one reason and argument of Bombshell being Cyclonus is in the actual movie itself. During the reformatting scene, it clearly shows Bombshell in the forefront being converted into the warrior Cyclonus, and Skywarp way in the background being turned into a second Cyclonus referred to by Unicron as his Armada. Okay, now before we go any further, let's tackle that. According to early drafts like Scourge and his army of sweeps, Cyclonus was originally meant to have his own little group, collectively called his Armada. Cyclonus and the Armada. I call dibs on that band name. I mean, it makes sense from a toy selling perspective as it would encourage kids to buy multiples of Scourge and Cyclonus toys. But even if the scene and line curiously remained in the movie, the whole Armada thing was pretty much dropped from the start and Cyclonus was made his own bot. Now that being said, a good number of fans, including myself, feel that despite what was depicted on screen, Bombshell turning into Cyclonus just didn't make any sense. I mean, just from a symmetrical standpoint. Given no one is debating that the blue Seeker, Thundercracker, became the blue Scourge, it should simply follow that the purple Seeker, Skywarp, be turned into the purple Cyclonus. And the fact that both Skywarp and Cyclonus are jets should further hammer that point across. But going deeper than that, for all his faults, Skywarp is best known as the Seeker most loyal to Megatron. I mean, from the original cartoon miniseries, when Skywarp was the first to be revived after the Autobot arc crashed into a volcano, he didn't hesitate to revive his leader Megatron next. Something Starscream definitely would not have done, as he would have easily just left Megs for dead or blown him to bits in his defenseless state. And while Thundercracker would have most likely just flown off on his own to become a screenwriter. And, bunny ears aside, loyalty to his leader Galvatron is what Cyclonus is best known for. As for Bombshell, he was more often than not portrayed as quite the opposite. While not as in-your-face traitorous as Starscream, the creepy Bombshell and his fellow Insecticons were always scheming and looking out for their own interests. Plus, the Insecticons are also known for the numerous clones that they can produce, which make more sense as fodder for the sweeps and Armada. Of course, there's also the third or fourth option wherein neither or both of them make up Cyclonus, as once again in early drafts, Cyclonus is constructed out of a lost spark from a long-dead and unnamed ancient Decepticon set adrift during a battle in the Decepticons' Hall of Heroes. And then it's also worth considering that it didn't matter because at this point, both Skywarp and Bombshell were supposedly dead. Let's call them mostly dead. And so in this case, Cyclonus was made up of parts from both of them, which was the stance that Transformers movie story consultant Flint Dilley takes, that they were both Cyclonus. Jeez, talk about a major cop-out. What side you fall on with regards to this debate? Let me know in the comments below. Anyway, with all that aside, let's move on, shall we? While I have always joked about Cyclonus' weird helmet and have ultimately preferred Scourge over him, that doesn't mean I don't hold Cyclonus in high regard. In fact, I really love the trio they form with their leader, Galvatron. As viewer at DamianRico9404 pointed out to me, visually they seem to take inspiration from a medieval or fantasy-based trio, with Galvatron as the king with his crown-looking head design, Cyclonus as a knight, and Scourge as a wizard. So as the knight of this medieval trio, Cyclonus is basically Galvatron's right-hand man, and as mentioned earlier, is best known for his unwavering loyalty to his king, which is quite the contrast of the Megatron Starscream dynamic. Speaking of which, I always find it to be an interesting twist on how Megatron was the mass shifter, shrinking down to a deadly weapon for Starscream to wield, while Cyclonus mass shifted the opposite way, growing into a ship for Galvatron to pilot. Anyway, after the movie, Cyclonus continued to serve loyally next to Galvatron, and it was actually this loyalty that garnered the attention of a Quintesson scientist in the episode The Killing Jar, wherein Cyclonus, Ultramagnus, Wreck-Gar, and the human Marissa Fairborn are all kidnapped by the Quintesson scientist for some experiments. Cyclonus' loyalty is put to the test when the scientist has him tangled with a fake Galvatron. Eventually, though, the four subjects manage to get free, but in their struggle to escape the Quintesson ship, end up getting sucked into a black hole and have to work together in order to get out. Anyway, at one point, Ultramagnus is sucked out into space, and it is actually Cyclonus who saves him by using his personal tractor beam to reel him back in. His reasoning being that Ultramagnus deserved a proper warrior's death in combat, showing that the evil Decepticons still followed an honorable warrior code, like a knight. I guess that Scourge and the Sweeps didn't get that memo when they blew up a defenseless Magnus on the planet Junkion. And speaking of Scourge, aside from both being created by Unicron, another thing he and Cyclonus had in common was that they were both possessed by Starscream's ghost, who uses Cyclonus to lead Galvatron into an Autobot trap, which he manages to escape, blasting poor Cyclonus in an attempt to rid him of Starscream's ghost. Well, he succeeds, but Starscream just ends up finding a new host within Scourge. or was that a sweep? Damn, I can't tell those blue dudes apart. And while you could excuse Cyclonus for leading his leader into a trap due to being possessed, in the very oddball episode Web World, Cyclonus, on his own volition but still out of genuine concern, leads Galvatron into another sort of trap. Therapy. After succumbing to the pressure from other Decepticons over Galvatron's increasing madness, and taking bad advice from the Quintessons despite trusting them no further than he can throw Triptychon, Cyclonus tricks his leader into going to the planet Torculon in search of more Autobots. In reality, Torculon turns out to be some sort of medical asylum where Galvatron is imprisoned with the intention of curing him of his madness. After numerous unsuccessful attempts, the Torculon therapists decide to link Galvatron to the planet itself, which turns out to be some supercomputer, with the intent to basically wipe out his mind if they are unable to cure him. At this point, Cyclonus realizes that this was a bad idea and tries to stop them, but to no avail. Fortunately though, Galvatron turns out to be too hard to handle for even the supercomputer planet, which ends up getting infected by the Decepticon leader's madness. Fortunately, Cyclonus distracts Galvatron from completely obliterating the Torculons by redirecting his wrath towards the Autobots, sending him off to another anger-driven hunt. But as entertaining as those episodes were, shout out to friend of the toy shelf at the Duck632 for reminding me of them, by the way. In the comics, Cyclonus, Galvatron, and Scourge are also known for quite a number of time-hopping adventures in the original Marvel UK series, jumping between the past and the present so frequently in an attempt to find a way to defeat Unicron that they eventually caused a rift in time and space. At one point, Galvatron returns to the past, leaving Cyclonus and Scourge under the command of Shockwave in the future, whom the duo kill. Okay, actually it was the bounty hunter Death's Head that did the deed, but Cyclonus and Scourge helped. Regardless, Shockwave's death in the future ultimately serves to be Cyclonus' undoing when they return to the present. Cyclonus accidentally divulges to the present-day Shockwave that he and Scourge kill him in the future, which was kinda true from a certain point of view, and that logically does not sit well with the one-eyed Decepticon. So Shockwave unleashes a brainwashed Megatron clone upon Cyclonus and Scourge, and while the latter manages to escape, Cyclonus basically gets his head ripped off, instantly ending him. Shockwave then uses Cyclonus' remains to decorate his throne. Anyway, it's Cyclonus' death in the present, 20 years before his actual creation by Unicron, that finally breaks open the rift. Fortunately, the rift is eventually sealed when a defiant Galvatron, a willing Scourge, and a dead Cyclonus are returned to the future, and the rift is sealed up by an X-ray blast care of Shockwave. Anyway, it would be years later in the IDW comics where Cyclonus as a character would be basically reinvented. Unlike his original backstory, in the IDW universe, Cyclonus, along with Galvatron and Scourge, are not and have never been creations of Unicron, but rather are a trio of very ancient Transformers, like forged more than 8 million years before the present-day Ancient. Back then, Cyclonus was already characterized as a very stoic and emotionless individual with a deep love for Cybertron, and a strong loyalty to the barbarian Galvatron, serving as his favorite bodyguard. Anyway, a few million years later, the Cybertronian leader Nova Prime pushes to spread his rule across the galaxy through conquest aboard the first Ark starship, envisioned as the inaugural step to establishing a Pax Cybertronia throughout the cosmos. And you thought Megatron's Peace Through Tyranny was original. Galvatron is chosen to be part of this crusade, and due to its close association to him, so is Cyclonus. Unfortunately, their expedition is cut short when the Ark is lost in a mysterious spatial anomaly known in Cybertronian legends as the Dead Universe, an alternate reality of darkness and decay, which is where Cyclonus and company remained until the present day when they finally escaped to wreak havoc on the Autobots and Decepticons as a contingent of, well, undead zombie bots led by Galvatron and Nova Prime, switching out the original N-word in his name with a new one, Nemesis. In the end though, it was Cyclonus' fierce love for Cybertron which ultimately led him to go against Galvatron and company when their plans for conquest threatens to destroy Cybertron itself. Cyclonus battles against his old boss, whom he accuses of brainwashing him into attacking Cybertron. In the end, the Autobots led by Optimus Prime are able to defeat Galvatron, and Cyclonus, no longer an undead individual, literally gains a new lease on life and joins the Autobots as a member of Rodimus's crew aboard the Lost Light starship. Given his past and, well, basically looking like an evil Decepticon, it takes a while for Cyclonus to be fully accepted by most of the crew, especially the crazy, violent, and maniacal Autobot, Whirl, an individual that Cyclonus, who was trying to turn over a new leaf, swore he would eventually kill at some point, expressing that sentiment while giving Whirl a warm hug and a sinister whisper into his ear. To be fair, I guess decorating an abandoned structure with the remains of Cyclonus' old comrades, the Sweeps, would put you on his bad side. From the start, Whirl openly rejects Cyclonus as a member of the Lost Light due to his previous association with Galvatron and viewing him as an uptight relic from a bygone era. On his part, Cyclonus sees Whirl as reckless and dishonorable. Fortunately, their relationship as two bitter rivals eventually gets to a point of tense but mutual respect, with the chaotic Whirl coming to appreciate Cyclonus' resilience and discipline, and Cyclonus recognizing the deep pain and self-loathing beneath Whirl's aggression. So I guess at this point, it would be safe to call them frenemies. More significant though than Whirl would be the unlikely pairing of Cyclonus with an unexpected partner, the diminutive little Autobot Tailgate, who many would know as an obscure minibot Windcharger repaint / retool, but now reimagined in this universe as another ancient Transformer who found himself revived in the present day, giving both bots a fish-out-of-water situation that they are able to identify with together. Throughout the series, Cyclonus and Tailgate form a special bond that evolves from an uneasy companionship to something deeply affectionate. And after an enduringly long journey of personal growth and emotional struggles, Cyclonus lets down his walls and fully embraces his feelings for Tailgate, although they never officially become each other's conjuncts in Jura. If you're not familiar with this term, well, it's a thing in the IDW universe that I think deserves a whole nother episode of its own. Anyway, as the original IDW run comes to its end, Cyclonus and Tailgate go off on further adventures together but eventually settle down, with Whirl, who delightfully accepts Cyclonus' invitation for him to stay with them with a warm hug mirroring the same hug Cyclonus gave him at the start of their relationship. Minus the killing part, of course. Now, while I know that IDW's take on Cyclonus was quite a departure from what most of us were used to, I will give them credit for trying to breathe new life into the character. But if you ask me, as interesting as that Cyclonus turned out to be, he's not the version of Cyclonus that I would subscribe to. But I'll tell you what you can subscribe to: my channel. Anyway, the 2007 series Transformers Animated gave us another iteration of Cyclonus, which unfortunately was more of a glorified cameo as a member of another Decepticon unit referred to as Team Char. Although he doesn't have a lick of dialogue or enjoy early access and exclusive content as a member of this channel, he does manage to take out the Autobots Ironhide and Brawn with one blow of his dual-wielding blades. The animated almanac does give us a little bit more info on his character, being a dark individual who mysteriously appears during a storm of light and tachyons over the Cybertronian city of New Kaon, constantly muttering the name Galvatron. It seems the animated writers had serious plans for this guy before the show was unfortunately and abruptly cancelled. So yeah, that's all we got from this version of Cyclonus. And while Takara managed to squeeze out a toy of his Team Char mate Blackout before the animated toy line ended as well, Cyclonus wasn't as lucky since apparently, animated's unique style aside, his look wasn't much of a departure from the mainstream Cyclonus, of which Hasbro released their first new toy of since the original in 2008 as part of the Universe line. I remember finding a loose version of this guy in a random table during a Singapore Sunday flea market. In hindsight, it was most likely a stolen sample from the factory since to my knowledge, it had not yet hit retail shelves at that point. But I didn't care as I was just so stoked to have the new Cyclonus in my hands. And considering that this was the first update of Cyclonus in over 20 years, he was
pretty good. It's pretty good.
Aside from the fact that his legs didn't really plug in securely anywhere in jet mode, there was still a lot to like about this guy, and he even came with his target master buddy Nightstick because, you know, at some point Cyclonus time traveled back to the past and joined up with Scorponok's crew to travel to Nebulos and become a target master. Anyway, the biggest and most unfortunate drawback of this guy was that he was too small as a deluxe-sized transformer, which I didn't think was fitting for a character like Cyclonus. Fortunately, in 2015, we did get a larger Voyager Cyclonus, and as per the name of the subline this toy was released under, the Combiner Wars, this Cyclonus could merge with any combination of limbots out there and form the giant Galvatronus. Granted, this version of Cyclonus was basically an easy cash grab for Hasbro since this guy was just a retool of the aerial bot leader Silverbolt, but he was still cool for what he was, and it most likely served as the inspiration behind the version of Cyclonus that closed out the Transformers series Robots in Disguise in 2017 as the main bad guy in the series finale. As the story goes, this Cyclonus, along with his team of Decepticons, Treadshock, Riot Gear, Skyjack, Cyberwarp, man, who are these guys? I mean, if I didn't know any better, I would think that these names were just made up as a sorta super secret callback to the OG Decepticon, who was turned into Cyclonus. Skyjack? Cyberwarp? I wonder what Decepticon might they be alluding to. Sorry. So, Cyclonus and company managed to take out the Cybertronian High Council and posing as them, set off to lead the Autobots on Cybertron on a full-scale invasion of the Earth. In the end, the main heroes led by Bumblebee managed to defeat Team Cyclonus, but not before Cyclonus merges with his guys to form, you guessed it, Galvatronus, who was this close to defeating a combined Autobot form of Ultra Bee until the Decepticon Cyberwarp, who formed one of Galvatronus' arms, rebelled against the team, leading Ultra Bee to gain the, well, upper hand and ultimately defeat Cyclonus. Anyway, while Cyclonus hasn't had too many more toys of him released through the years, I will say that in my opinion, the only two versions of Cyclonus you'd need in any display would be first, the Kingdom version for Chug lovers, and Quietus, a third-party Cyclonus by the company Fans Toys for masterpiece collectors. Kingdom Cyclonus may not be perfect. I mean, Hasbro could have given him a better head sculpt and used non-yellowing plastic for his construction. But other than those little nitpicks, this is a solid plastic representation of Cyclonus with a perfect mix of size and engineering that is intuitive, fun, and not headache-inducing. For that, I give you Fans Toys Quietus. Just kidding. Look, I know Masterpiece Transformers aren't the kind of toys you want to be transforming back and forth over and over, but even by Masterpiece standards, engineering-wise, Quietus is pretty decent. And speaking of decent, I do know that there's an equally serviceable option in the older X-Transbots, Aligos. But I just find that dude too chonky for Cyclonus. I don't know, I know many people are into that, but unless their name is Sea Spray or Cosmos, I'm not really into chonky bots. Which is the main reason why I opted not to buy Magic Square's Light of Peace. If you want to know which Prime I did end up getting from my Masterpiece shelf, you can check out this story here. Or if you want other Transformer stories, you can check out this playlist over here. Either way, thanks for watching, and I hope you come back for more.